Hello and welcome to the 10th episode of Dice and Design. And today, once again, I'm joined by Tyler and from the channel Flame Zombie One. The link is in the description below. And today we're abording two topics today. The first one I'm gonna talk about is meta-currency. Then we're gonna deal, if we have time, we're probably gonna have time. Meta-currency shouldn't take too long. Then we're gonna talk about meta-plot. Meta-currency. So first, I think the first thing we need to do is to define what they are, right?
Yeah.
Because meta-currency have been around for quite a while now, but they're not really like an old school game. You don't tend to see them like an old school D&D. Not every game has them. But what we mean by meta-currency, or when you have some kind of a currency, some kind of token, some kind of like point that you can gain to control the narrative in some way. That so you can think about, like, for example, inspiration in D&D 5e. You can think of bennies in Savage World. You can think of Fate Point, like Guardian Rune was saying, Fate Point in Fates. You can think of that.
Yep.
And then like there's momentum in Conan and Arta in
Yeah.
Burning Wheel, which can be a little more on the edge of are they like really meta currency or not? And that's something I want to discuss about. What do you think, Tyler? And how do you feel about meta currency in general?
I think it depends entirely on whether or not I think there's two issues that we have with meta currencies that need to be solved, which are, if you're adding meta currencies to a game which is already pretty crunchy, you risk really killing the game flow. It's, another subsystem. Meta currencies should kind of be like the core system other than the die mechanic. Right? If you've got like I'm playing with Pathfinder's Mythic system right now, and I'm not a huge fan of it because it's yet another thing to keep track of. You've got all your spells to keep track of. You're keeping track of all your feats, all of your, different class abilities, and now you've got mythic abilities to keep track of on top of that with the mythic points, and you can spend the mythic points on 90 different things, and so it can be too much on one end. So there's an elegance of game design on that. And then the other end is, does the game actually explain what this meta currency means in the world? Diegetic versus non-diegetic.
That's my big point about meta currency as well. Like Dice still here saying like going come right out of the gate on this at you. If you need a meta currency, that's a failure in your game design because the mechanics aren't working. And I say like oftentimes meta currency can feel like tacked on. And like you mentioned, like for me, like I don't tend to like meta currency, but the big difference for me is if it's like diegetic or non-diegetic. So is the like I said, like I mentioned like the momentum in Conan 2D20, but the momentum in 2D20 only lasts for the scene that you're in, and it's like the momentum that you build up in the scene, so you can really visualize it. It's really part of the core system. So this kind of meta currency doesn't bother me. And the same way in Winter Down, you could say I have some form of meta currency because I got the spirit point, but the spirit point represent the stamina and the moral of your character, and you can spend them to get bonus dice. But that's just like you exert more effort in trying to do what you're trying to do. So in those cases where like the meta currency is diegetic, diegetic is like part of the world, instead of like the term is often used like the music in movie. If it's just like in the soundtrack, that's non-diegetic. If it's a music that's playing like in the scene and the character can hear it and stuff like that, that's diegetic. It's like part of the world, exists in the world that it is.
Yeah. For example, like in Pathfinder, mythic points are not really defined. They're just you're mythic or you're not, and you get more of them or you have less of them, and they do stuff. And you sort of have to post facto come up with, okay, why do I have these mythic points that it's not explained by the book at all? Compared to something like Weird Frontiers, where The hexes and boons are representatives of these otherworldly figures uh, taking a notice of you and either giving you benefits or drawbacks accordingly. So one of them is explained in the world, diegetic, and the other one's just it's purely mechanical.
Yeah, and there's also like a bigger impact on that versus how you gain, like how you gain and how you spend
Mm-hmm.
this meta currency as a, I think, a big impact on that as well. There's a, for example, like in like just we often take the example of D&D 5e because that's like most
Mm-hmm.
people are familiar somewhat to it. Inspiration is very
Mm-hmm.
non-diegetic.
Yeah,
It's
because
completely out of the
the
world.
DM is actively telling you, the player, oh, you have this now.
Yeah,
It's a yeah.
yeah, and the way that you gain this inspiration is gonna be like with like, oh, did you do like a good role playing scene, like were you good in your role play, or did you make the GM laugh? That's the kind of example that they give. And that's like, those I fucking hate. I don't want to reward you for your role play. Like if the character does something
Mm.
and gain some form of bonus from it, that's one thing. But if it's like the player doing something and then the GM saying, "Oh, I like that. Here, I have a token," that for me break the immersion. So I'm not a big fan
And
of that.
tell me, do I sound better now?
Yes, much better.
Okay. You should have told me something. It defaulted to my webcam microphone and not my.
I was about to yell
Oh,
at you. I thought it was just
yeah,
like
no, I
noise in
was
the
like, why is
background.
my mic recording so low right now? I was okay. Um, um, there we go. Sorry about that, everyone. Yeah, and it brings in some GM fiat too, where
Yeah.
you can start playing favorites, and then when you're already talking to the players and not the characters, then it can lead to more of some of the players going, hey, I just did the same thing. Why didn't you give me inspiration for that? Oh, well, and then you've just like totally lost, 5-10 minutes to
Yeah,
nonsense.
it can feel very arbitrary, and then like you you
Hmm.
you might have the feeling of like, oh, maybe I should try to balance, always getting inspiration to that one
Hmm.
guy, maybe,
Hmm.
like, and then like
Yeah.
everybody gets inspiration. You just like
Yeah.
become like fucking Oprah or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and on the flip side, if you are a little stingier with it, your players they become less focused on uh trying to just play their characters and more focused on like, ooh, this GM doesn't give inspiration very much. What do we have to do to get him to give us inspiration? And then they're like trying to game the system and taking actions that don't really make any sense because they're trying to be like, is this cool to his mind? What is going,
Mhm.
so yeah.
Yeah. Our men say like, I'm not a
Mm.
fan of giving player special tangible reward for doing something special. Just congrats for doing a good thing should be enough. I feel a bit of the same way as well.
Yeah.
Like just like, I want everybody to try to do the best role play, and role
Mm.
play is kind of its own reward. I mean, I don't
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
give you like a chit, a token.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. Yeah.
Yep. And he
Um.
said, yeah, to that, I do understand something like a free roll chit is okay, but what I want each player to get one. Some game do that. You each at each start of the
Mm.
session, you get like one of those like token. Um, and I'm iffy on that. I think it's a little better, but
Yeah. I
it's
think a
just
way
it's
that
basically a
yeah.
reward just for showing up. But in
And
the
some games do that diegetically by like basing it on luck. Like not an
yeah,
RPG, but a funny example of a diegetic way of doing it is the Talisman board game actually handles that. You get different characters get more reroll chits based on their fate or luck. It's some stat. So it's actually tied into the character. Um,
yeah, and also I find like because that's the thing. Like if you just like give a token and you say like, oh, you can reroll once during the session, like
mm,
where does that reroll come from? What I mean? That's why I'm
yeah.
saying like in Conan when you have like stuff like, well, your team, your gang, I've been doing well like during this fight. They've been like conquering a lot. They've been like being very active, very violent. They've been like dominating a lot. Then well, okay, then I can see like, okay, you're inspired by that. So there's this thing as well. And that's the other aspect of meta currencies. How do you spend it?
Hmm.
Sometimes some games gonna do that just for reroll. Some game Rune mentioned like Warhammer has 4 meta currency, and they all resist a type of negative consequence. They function more like a different hit point. I guess if that's meta currency, and this is kind of like on the line because
Yeah.
there are kind of like some kind of resistance. You can resist those things a few times depending on how much you get, but sometimes the line is not quite clear in that sense. Even with momentum, or for my own example with the Winter Dawn, the spirits,
Mm.
I wouldn't be sure if I would count that as meta currency. They do fill the role a bit of meta currency, and I don't feel the need to have meta currency because I have those. But what I was saying before that.
Oh, the issue of what does it mean to spend it, not just to get
Oh
it.
yeah.
Because I think way
The way
more
you spend
games
it.
way more games explain how you get it than how it's spent. Because and I think there's a mechanical side to that too, where I like having like physical. This is one of the ways I like having one of the reasons I like having a physical table, because nobody has to say anything. If it is just a luck or fate sort of thing, just put the thing towards me and I know, okay, yep, you've got to re-roll. You don't have to, say anything. It's just an unspoken, behind the unseen things in the world happening.
Yeah. Get well soon, St. James. You
Yeah.
can always watch on the replay. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
yeah. And because like I think there's like maybe two big family of spending meta currency. One is for fudging result, and one is for narrative control. So one, like you just like, oh, I'm just gonna use this token. I'm gonna re-roll this roll that I just missed. The other one is like, oh, now I earned this token earlier. Now I get to be the GM second or two. I can do something in the scene and say like, oh, now like a pony show up.
Yeah, Blades in the Dark does that, where you roll your skill and then it's not even just a, oh, I failed, I re-roll. It's a, well, okay, actually, GM, that didn't happen. And so you can spend multiple points stacking them onto each other. So it can become like a 10, 15-minute ordeal of trying to figure out what exactly happened when this single skill roll was rolled, because people just keep retconning what they said. Yeah, like Dice Tales, the artist formerly known as Crapphone, here says, why should players be able to retcon outcomes? This is the flip side of a railroad, stealing agency by stealing consequences.
Yep.
Yeah, that's sort of what we're trying to get to the bottom of, I suppose. Why should players be able to retcon outcomes?
Yeah, and there's also a difference. Like like if you just to keep the example simple, if you were to say like I can use my inspiration to gain advantage, that's a different thing than say I can use my inspiration to re-roll a failed roll. You know what I mean? One, you have to decide in advance, so you're not like retconning the result of the rolled state, but you just like give you an advantage.
Yeah.
The other one, yeah, just like, well, I want to succeed anyway. Just like, am I gonna spend and some games just say that you don't even re-roll, you just turn in a fail into a success.
Yeah.
So
I'm more a fan of when the mechanic lets you add something to a scene, but it doesn't let you remove something to from a scene, right? Where you don't have to, because it's right. You wouldn't, unless you're like hallucinating all the time. You're not going to go into a room and go, you see a guy pointing a shotgun at you and go, well, actually he's not there. It's like, huh? But it is very possible for you to go into a room and go, oh crap, I don't have any weapons. I'm going to spend one of my, luck points or fate points or whatever and go, I see a gun on the ground. I'm going to pick it up and shoot the guy. Oh yeah, you didn't notice the gun when you immediately walked in the room. So, but it turns out to be there sparingly, right? Like,
and that also like really depend on the player that you have. Like, say some players are more reasonable with it, and it's almost like you're almost punished for being reasonable in those cases, because like there's always going to be this player that's going to push a bit, and the GM is going to be okay, you're pushing a bit, but
or you have to have this like really long strict list of here are the things that you can do with the meta currency, and then your players are having to like memorize this or have the list pulled up all the time of like, what can I do with it? And that's that's the other issue of it with making it too crunchy. So it's really tricky.
Some of these sorry.
Somebody is asking me to talk about Pathfinder. That's a rarity. Guardian of the Rune says I could talk about Pathfinder, and many others use victory points to keep track of the back and forth of mass battles or chase scenes, etc.
Those are also like
Hmm.
outside of the scope of meta-currency because
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
so diegetic, they're so like in-world, they're so explained. Like it's just like it's like if you do a race and you say like, well, you get closer to your objective. I wouldn't even consider those meta-currency because they're
Yeah.
you know
It's
barely
more of a
meta at all.
tracker. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's more of because at that point kind of like are hit points a meta currency? Not really.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Exactly. There's some case where the line is blur. Yeah. And do you
but
think that
you have
those
given me free reign to talk about Pathfinder's mythic
oh,
and hero point
please.
system though, so I'll hold you to that.
I wanted to ask you, while those meta currency that allow for a player narrative insertion, do you think that those can take you out of the player mindset of the your character being the character mindset? Now you have to think about something else. You in a different way, break the immersion a bit.
Especially when they are worded as player authorship, as they so often are, and it becomes like, well, geez, a lot of people are already frustrated authors when it comes to it. When the book is actively telling you, yeah, be an author, right? Just write your cool story about how the scene goes out. Then it's like, okay, well, we're not really role playing this anymore. And then all of a sudden you run out of those points and you have to completely switch gears and go, oh, I actually have to interact with the die mechanic now. It can be weird in that way. I think it can work though if you just switch your brain from using the earlier example. I look around the room to see if I can find a gun to I see a gun. Yeah, I find a gun in the corner of the room and grab it and then burn.
You almost have to retrain yourself in a way to be much more like to allow yourself to include those things. But then you also have to keep track of what. Or do you have the point to do that? Do you have like the point to like what if it was like you want to find like something mundane is gonna be 1 point. You want to find a gun is gonna be 2 points. You can get into those complicated system. Yeah. I want to talk about Burning Wheel a bit because like Burning Wheel got 3 forms of meta currency, which are fate. They call it Arta, and they're fate, persona, and deeds, and you gain them in different way. You gain your fate by doing personal accomplishment, doing deeds by accomplishing things that are greater than yourself, and doing personal and fate. Personal is the personal accomplishment, and fate is the one that is the biggest one. Like when you do like you finish a campaign, you do something great, something that is noteworthy in the realm, then you get fate point. Something like that. I might get it wrong, but and you can spend them in usual way to increase your odd with dice roll and stuff like that. Do some stuff like that. Ignore some injury, various way like that. But I think that they do that is, I would say, interesting. I don't know if I like it.
That's what I could say about the entirety of Burning Wheel. It's a game I want to run at some point because I read through it and I'm like, I don't know if I like this or not. I'll need to play it to see like how this actually works.
But the spending of those Arta point, those meta currency, is linked to the advancement of your skill in some way. So you have to, and the way they do it is fucking insane. For every skill you have to track the 3 meta currency that you spend on your skill. And it's not like one. It's like, oh, you have to spend like 20 point of fate or 20 point of deeds to advance that skill.
Yep.
The whole thing is insane. But that's now like you kind of link them like that's so weird in the narrative form. Like how do you explain that? How do you there's something weird about that. Yeah, you need to push yourself, but it's linked to what you did in the past when you pushed yourself in the past.
I find when games try to become too simulationist, they sort of start to stray away from it because you start focusing on the mechanics of the game more than playing the character. So you end up like playing the computer system rather than the person playing the simulation, if that makes sense. So there's like that would be, in my mind, and I haven't played it, I've only read it, going too far into the crunchy spectrum, to going too far as to explicitly describe everything. And Pathfinder kind of has the same issue in that you've got mythic points. You can burn a mythic point to add die to rolls. You can burn a mythic point to use any of your mythic abilities. There's a giant list of mythic abilities to choose from. You can get mythic feats, which are different than your normal feats. There are mythic spells that you can pick, which you have to have the original version of the spell to begin with, and then you have to spend a mythic point to use the mythic version of the spell, and then you get all your mythic points back at the beginning of the day, but there are other ways to get your mythic points back. It's like... And by the time you've done all that, you're not even playing your character. You're just reading this giant list of stuff that's like, hold on, I don't remember if I can do that right now. Whereas the character they can just do stuff, if it's like an inherent ability that's just innate to them, with like a sorcerer or something, they just cast magic. I've got the spell written down. I cast the spell. That's it. I know what the spell does. That takes you away from a character that just knows how their powers work. So
at some point it becomes overwhelming. And, and at some point, like, are you pushing your player to play like this game? I'm just gonna have to do the thing that I need to do to acquire those. How do you gain those mythic points in Pathfinder? Is it like just awarded by the GM?
So basically the characters gain mythic status, and then in addition to their class levels, they'll have a mythic tier. So you start at mythic tier 1 and you have like 5 points that refresh every day, and when you do certain stuff depending on what mythic path you go down. And the way it's awarded is they have like a short paragraph of like, which is basically, there are a bunch of different ways to gain mythic status. It's up to GM fiat.
Up to GM, because that's like, what are those? You can get, oftentimes those meta-currencies can be awarded if the character does something cool. If the player rolled pretty well. If you make the GM laugh. It's gonna be well, sometimes, like you say, like, you just gain a certain fixed amount every start of the session. So you just show up at a table and you get some. Burning Wheel and other systems do that as well. You have to vote at the end of a session of like, who was the MVP, who did the best role play, and then like people get like people get point for the next session based on that. Some system, it's if you do a crit, you gain 1. Great success on a roll, you're gonna get some. Some system like have a class that you have like a specific action you can do that will generate some point that you can use later. Which one you think like is more like harmful in the whole fucking scheme of things? For me, it's like, I know like which one I find the most harmful. Like, if you make the GM laugh, you're gonna like that does I fucking hate.
Yeah, because then it's is your character doing something your character would do, and that's funny. What if you're playing a character that's morose and not very funny, and then all of a sudden you're making jokes all the time? Then it's kind of so I'm with you there. Elle actually brings up a good point here. Why avoiding? I don't think avoiding, but not coming to it yet. The big meta currencies of XP and skill points. And I was actually going to mention Godlike, the one roll engine, has a similar thing to what you just mentioned, Max, where at the end of the game, everyone votes on a person to get an extra XP based on who roleplayed their character. But I can't remember what the criteria are, but it's interesting that it's democratic in that way. You and I have opinions on democracy.
Not a fan.
But as long as you vetted your players, I guess that's but then it also creates this weird situation of, if you do have players that you all like, to my experience, what ends up happening is everybody votes for everybody else, and then nobody and you have to recall a vote, and you're like, oh man, I don't know, I liked everyone here. But yeah, is XP a meta currency and skill points to that point? I would say skill points are not a meta currency.
No,
Because
skill
you
point.
don't because you don't use them in the game. As in, you use the skill once you've allocated the points, but that's not something you use in the middle of the session.
Yeah, and skill point also like are very like in world, like you get skill point because you get better at your skill and stuff like that. Like it's quite straightforward, and it's not huge to fudge roll. It's not used. It's not used to influence the scene. So the same thing with XP as well. Like I would say like they are in a way a currency in the game. But it's not a meta currency in the sense that it's not outside the game. It's still inside the game.
I think though where we do have a point though is with multi-classing and old school D&D and the idea of banking XP and choosing not to level up so that you can multi-class into something that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to. That's sort of in the same vein.
Yeah, but you can say like, well, actually, this XP that I gain was for like whatever. Just like, maybe it gets a bit on the line, but like, it's not usually how we understand meta currency as like those are so core to those games, and they serve a specific purpose. It's pretty straightforward, and it doesn't give outwardly control on the game to the player.
Don't remind me that 3rd edition used XP for magic item creation. Good God, that was a terrible decision.
Well, you know what? In that case, now we're blurring the line even more. So now XP became like a bit of like a meta currency because you can spend it. Like now you have like multiple choice to spend it. So
and then
what about like gold for XP?
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Gold for XP. That's very like.
Does that become too meta?
Yeah, and especially because I have seen very, very few, I can count on a single finger, the number of games I have seen that ran gold as XP, where there were extremely physically powerful noblemen running around because they had tons of XP because it's all their gold. And so it creates this problem in the world that
oftentimes it's gold that you retrieve from a dungeon, not just gold. Like you cannot get it from being a merchant, or you become like a high level merchant, I guess.
And then it's like, well, does the high level merchant have a ton of health because he's like so there's all these like
because merchant is not a kid that it's not a class with it dice.
Well, I guess it depends on what system you're doing the gold as XP in.
Same thing for the noble. He's a high level noble because he got a lot of money, but doesn't mean he's a high level fighter necessarily. Like it's something like because they didn't get. It's not a high level adventurer because he didn't get his gold from adventuring, but the gold for XP does become a bit meta. Especially when you say, well, you have to spend the gold to gain the XP. And sometimes it's the other two. You just like chuck the gold away, and then you gain XP, or you can buy stuff. Sometimes like some game that make you make a choice there. Now you're becoming like much more meta again. Because now like there's this thing that is kind of
stuff, or do you want to be better? And it's,
and there's no real justification in game. Like we say, well, you need to train, whatever. Just like, well, does it? Just like I don't know.
Elle says that NPCs don't have levels in XP for gold games before D&D before 3rd edition, but I could have sworn there were some modules for AD&D 2nd edition, like a Hollow World, where the NPCs have, but maybe it was an optional rule there. There's lots of like weird, the AD&D 2nd edition into 3rd edition, some weird stuff starts happening, so I may be misremembering here. But then we get into another issue of why do some people in this world play by totally different rules than other people, but that's a topic for a different day. But
because they're adventurer, but like most NPC back then like were like level 0.
Yes, that's very true. That's a good thing to bring up.
They didn't have it die. Yeah, it's like like the wizard got like a D4 it die, but like the merchant got like a D0 it die. Basically, so you just gain 1 here and there. So I think it's quite clear from our talk here that neither of us are big fan of meta currency in general.
No, I think if you're gonna have a meta currency, explain it in the world, make it diegetic, and only have one. Like, don't have a million meta currencies that you have to keep track of because I was told to talk about Pathfinder, so I will. To make it even more ridiculous, you can also play with the hero point system. So you can have hero points and mythic points and spells to keep track of, and feats with usage per day to keep track of, and you're playing a spreadsheet simulator at that point, and that's just yep.
Yeah. Yeah, like that's what I would say as well. Like for the better currency, like keep it like in world.
Mm,
Don't go too many. Uh, don't have like allow to give like better odd on your roll.
mm.
I'm not a big fan of the reroll. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I
There's
think I'm fine with advantage as a roll twice, take the better one. No, I think
yeah,
that's fine.
depending on your system you are, like I
Yeah.
said, like in dice pool system, yeah, you can add a dice or two, whatever, just like
Or drop the lowest, or yeah.
or drop the lowest. Yeah, I think those are can be
Mhm.
fair way to do it because
Mm.
it's fairly fast, and especially if you can like justify it in the session.
Yeah.
Another thing like I want to talk also about meta currency, which is quite controversial, and it has been mentioned a bit by Guardian of the Rune actually earlier mentioned it. Oh, I'm gonna do Armand's comment first. GURPS
Mm.
has luck ability that gives you
Mm.
reroll in game. It costs point to buy when you build a character. I heard about that. I'm not familiar with GURPS, but I heard people say like, well, then you should just put all your point in luck.
Yes, I mentioned that last week. Yeah, the GURPS has that issue of because luck makes you good at everything. People are just running around with like terrible stats and no skills and just tons of just tons of luck, and you get these really weird hobo-y characters.
Yeah. The comment I wanted to address from
Mhm.
Guardian of the Rune is that like, in Coriolis, the player can change thing and get rerolls anytime, but the GM get darkness point to spend on bad luck for the player and special ability for enemies. And what I wanted to talk about is the GM meta currency. And Conan got one as well with the Doom point.
Mhm.
And they are quite controversial because some say, well, I'm the GM. If I want to introduce complication, I'll do it whenever I want. I'm not bound by the rule of those games. You know what I mean? But those games say, well, if you can use one Doom point to bring in reinforcement, you can use one Doom point to have the enemies go before the player. The enemies go before the player character. So there's things like that you can do, and some people like it. Some people give like the GM very very fair. Some people say, well, it kind of like a step over your role as a GM. How do you feel about it?
Um, I I could see that, but I kind of like that. If you have good players, this won't be a problem. But it will also help like a sort of itch at the back of some people's heads where it's like, this feels like he just wanted us to lose here. But it's like, no, there's a game mechanic, there's a spine to all of it. There's a skeletal system in place which says I'm allowed to do that. So when the players, read through the book and go, oh, that's a game mechanic, they're saying I'm okay with that being a game mechanic whenever they sit down to play in your sessions. So
Yep.
I guess it can deflect some of the some of the blame of situations to the game rather than you as the GM, by making it not so fiat. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I like the 2d20 Conan system,
Mm-hmm.
and they use the Doom point. Coriolis, I'm familiar with Forbidden Land, which is also a free game. I think it's like when you push your roll, then the GM can get like one of those points, and pushing your roll is basically like you fail at something, you can try again, but then you're gonna have like a negative consequence if you fail that time. The first time you just fail, no big deal, you didn't progress, you didn't succeed. Now you try again, you're gonna fail, and if you fail again, if you succeed, then fine. If you fail again, then you injure yourself and stuff like that. That's also kind of like there's no currency there, but it's also some type of meta thing. In Coriolis, they have like those darkness point. In Conan, when the players spend momentum, the GM gain Doom point, and and the GM can use those Doom point, like I said, like then you can like have the enemies take initiative and act before the PCs. Otherwise, the PC act first, and you can call for reinforcement and do stuff like that. And people say that, well, I should be able to do that if I'm a GM anyway, but I think I think it kind of work because I wouldn't say that it keeps you honest, because you can only do it if you got the doom point, but
Mm,
it's that it push you to keep the tone and some form of balance. If the player spend a lot of momentum, if the player like been like very awesome and stuff like that,
mm.
you get all those doom point, and then you kind of incentivize to spend them.
That's
So,
yeah,
you know,
that's true. Because
ma-
me as a GM, I'm often not as harsh as I should be.
exactly,
Probably like
exactly.
yeah, because
For
yeah,
for the
I
tone of
mm,
Conan, I think it works quite well,
yeah,
because like
yeah,
it is supposed to be harsh, and the
mm,
player, but the character are supposed to be heroic and to
yeah,
be like very savage and to kill a lot,
mm,
but the world is also supposed to be
yeah,
harsh. So now like you're gonna have like this heroism coming from the PCs, and you receive those tokens as the GM, and it's like almost like a
mm,
reminder more than anything else to say, okay, I need to put more opposition. And for that game, I think it works very well for the tone. For other games, like I wouldn't like. I don't think that works so well for like they did like a Star Trek 2D20.
hmm
I don't think that works as well.
yeah.
But for Conan, I think that's a system. And
Yeah,
like I said,
because there's
yeah,
always the
if you,
balance of wanting the player characters to be heroic, but needing
mm,
a struggle to be heroic towards, right? Because being a hero in a vacuum is kind of boring, which I think is one of the issues of like modern, D&D fourth edition and fifth
yeah.
edition.
Oh,
Uh,
there you go.
that
Ask,
is a great question, El.
yeah, why are those GM meta currency not as controversial as die funging? As die funging?
I would
I think
say because generally in all the systems I've seen, there may be one out there, it's symmetrical. If the
yeah,
GM gets a meta currency, then the players are always also have some meta currency to spend.
yeah.
But dice fudging, I ask a GM who is in favor of dice fudging why their players can't dice fudge,
Mm.
and they'll usually have like I have
Well,
not
that'd be
seen one that
cheating.
can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I'm the GM. What do you mean?
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that's the thing. Yeah, like it's because like the meta currency for the GM is kind of earned. Like it comes from the player. Like the example I was using is Conan. Like
mm,
when the player spend momentum. If the player don't spend momentum, you won't get those doom point.
mhm.
But if they do, then you do get doom point.
Mhm.
So that I think that's why like they get
Yeah.
it's not the same quite as
It's the
fudging.
the the system is creating the
Mm,
tone and the pace, whereas when a GM is die fudging, it's just totally up to GM fiat of, oh no, I want this character to die here. No, I want this character to live here. No, I want you to fail this save. I want you to succeed at this, and it becomes authorship and not the system driving conflict. So
yeah,
yeah,
you
yeah.
you step away from the game side. Like God in
Mm.
the Rune say, it's a constant back and forth between the player and the GM that keep both sides honest and engaged. Yeah, yeah.
That
Players
is
are
certainly
overcoming
a take.
challenges. Fudging like advantage in 5e is cheating. Fudging like advantage in 5e is cheating. A GM can cheat. Fudging like advantage. I'm not sure. Like the advantage mechanic usually in 5e is supposed to be earned for something in the
Mm.
situation that gives you an
Yeah.
advantage. That's not usually seen as fudging because yeah, you just roll two dice and take. I'm not sure what you're saying here.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
that's an interesting take. I guess on the GM can't cheat, that's a social contract thing, right? Like if your players
well,
are, if
that
your
that
players
because
are okay with you having if a GM for you at your table might mean I have total fiat control over the
I'm not sure. I'm
everything.
not sure. I'm reading that sentence to be honest. Like, is it say like a GM can cheat in the sense that like the GM's allowed to do whatever he
As in the
wants, so
GM
there's
isn't
no
allowed to
cheating,
cheat, or the GM can do no wrong. I read it as the
or
okay.
a GM can cheat in the sense that a GM
Uh,
shall not cheat.
Yeah, L, please get back to us. Advantage in 5e is fudging for players. Is it though? Because it's backed by a mechanic, and fudging
Yeah,
is
exactly.
not
Yeah,
backed by a mechanic.
I've seen some bad GM like just give advantage to a player because like
Mm,
you want him to succeed. Like you should have like a reason for it.
yeah.
Uh, and usually like the book gives you like plenty of reason to
Mm,
get advantage or disadvantage. But yeah, sometimes people play like fast and loose. Oh, you know what? Yeah, you can get advantage. And on some players say, "Oh, can I get advantage for that?" Because reason. And then the GM say, "Yeah, okay, get it, go for it." Like just because they want to succeed. In that sense, that become fudging. It's not great. It's a soft
yeah.
fudging because you still have a dice roll. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, Mark meant I'm of the feeling that the GM shouldn't screw over a player with fudging. Well, I think nobody likes fudging.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And if you fudge, like even for the player and stuff like that, it takes away something from the game as well.
yeah, it takes away the, oh god, the word everyone hates, verisimilitude. The, if it comes back to the quantum ogre thing, right? If why have a die roll if the players
Yep.
were going to succeed anyways? Why have a die roll if the players were going to fail anyways? Fudging generally tells you that you don't like the mechanic of your game. If you
Yeah.
don't like the results of the dice, you probably either shouldn't have called for a die roll at all, or you should be using a different mechanic.
Or fudging oftentimes also is like, well, are you in the railroad and then like you need a certain result to happen?
Yeah, that's true as well. Yep.
You just like it's fudging is oftentimes like a symptom of something like much more nefarious going
Yeah.
on.
Mm-hmm. It's a
Much more nefarious.
it's a really ugly band-aid fix for
Yeah.
a bigger problem.
What are the good side of meta-currency?
Good side of meta-currency, interacting with the world in a different way. I've noticed that in games with meta-currencies, it keeps some players that might be more passive a little more active, because they're not just sort of hypnotized into the, oh, I roll my die, oh yeah, I make my skill check. It's like, oh, I've got to think, I've got this other mechanic to keep track of, so they're a little more there, a little more attentive. And it just, at base, I think they're mostly there to make the game mechanics more interesting, to have just another thing to interact with.
Yeah, but oftentimes I find like they fail at that. I see like I would say like the one thing that meta-currency can add, considering the other caveat that we said earlier, like keep it in the world, keep it simple, keep it like that. Another thing that it can add is like some form of a resource management. If you have like role-playing games, there should be a lot about choice. You make choice and stuff like that. And when you have a dice roll to make, if the GM say, "Oh, just roll for your decks, whatever," it's just like whatever the situation.
Yeah.
And now, like, you just roll for your decks and hope for the result of the dice. You got no choice to make here. You got no agency. If you got some form of meta currency that you can spend and say, like, "Oh, okay, now do I want to use that point now?" You have a decision to make.
Yeah,
you
get into the game of resource management rather than just I do or don't.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, if it's just like a token that is linked to nothing in the world, then it takes you out of the role playing and bring you much more into the game aspect. If you can link this meta currency to the world, then like I said, like that's what I'm trying to do with the spirit point. Like, oh, I'm trying to lift that gate. Do I want to try a lot and tire myself? Or do I want to just give it a little try, and if it's not moving, I'm gonna find some other way to get in. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, but this resource management aspect, I think is good. Like that's something I find a lot of games lack at some point.
You've reminded me of the third Pathfinder meta currency. That none of these are default. These are all optional rules. This is what happens when you have a 12-year-old game that like 500 different people work on. There's also stamina points, which are my favorite of the three. I like stamina points because they represent something in the actual world. You can burn them to get real things. And if you burn all of your stamina points, there's a cost. You're fatigued now. So I think that's like Pathfinder hit like 1 out of 3 there.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to add on Meta-currency, or is that like pretty much covers it?
I think it pretty much covers it. That was a good one. There's lots of good conversation in the chat.
Yeah. So in summary, like what we'd say, like if you want to use meta-currency, keep it like linked inside the game world.
Mm-hmm.
Give it a reason to exist. Keep it simple. Keep it to 1 if you can. It can add like this resource management aspect, and it can give like if you have like this GM meta-currency, it can give you the little push that you need to be a little more harsh with your player. It can give you like the little incentive, or maybe I should spend those doom points.
Yeah, you look at this thing piling up and you're like, oh, I've been too easy on them, or
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes, that's
the
a
second
very
topic.
Sorry, I just want to mention last thing here in chat. Mar says, if you don't want to have to mess with the possibility of a roll failing, you can just let the roll auto succeed. That's like an unspoken rule in every tabletop RPG, which I feel like should be on like the first 5 pages of every book is like, you don't need to roll to tie your shoes and, you know, button your shirt, you know, like, because yeah, that can be a part of both fudging and meta currencies is fighting back against a GM
Yeah.
that's just like randomly making you roll to not trip over yourself every
He
2
had
seconds.
he had something here as well that is also important, but you can
Mm.
have the player roll for some other reason that doesn't decide success or failure,
Mhm.
because you can have success at a cost. You know, you
Yeah.
can say, well,
Mhm.
I'm gonna have you roll, you're gonna succeed anyway, but it's like maybe it's gonna
Yeah,
cost you
in
something.
a degree of success system, especially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the risks, but even if, like, if it's like binary, like a
Mhm,
D20 and stuff
mhm.
like that, you can say
Yeah,
like, well,
you can add.
you
Yeah,
know,
like I add degree of success to
yeah,
D20 systems. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah. The other topic that we want to cover
Mhm.
was metaplot, because we wrapped those two together because it was like the meta episode, like we talk
Mhm.
about meta stuff now.
Yeah.
And again, from the start, we should define what a metaplot is. I think it's tell me if you want to add something to that.
Mhm.
It's a overarching narrative outside of the PC's action, some kind of large scale conflict. It's some deep background with things still ongoing in the game as the campaign begin. When basically your game has a story that comes with the game that is not only background but also stuff that's gonna happen in the background and it's gonna keep happening. Will you say that if you have time, we're gonna cover that? So we
I
better
would,
stretch that one out.
I would say that's generally good, but I would add that it's. I would say that for me to be a meta plot, it has to be external. It has to be something that the GM and the players didn't come up with at the table. It has to be, you know, in fiction writing from the game designers, from, you know, novelists, you know, like
Yeah,
the old TSR novels, Dragonlance novels, and uh what's his name? R.A. Salvatore novels.
yeah.
Uh are examples, you know. Yeah.
Or the big example, the big game that did the meta plot a lot was the Wall of Darkness. There's this old
Yes. Yeah.
narrative, and
Mhm.
then every city got their prince, and you come at a
Mhm.
table, and they have all those supplement, and you can
Yep.
say, like, you can pick the supplement from your city that you prefer to play in or that you live in, and see,
Mhm.
oh, okay, this is a Sabbath city here, and there's
Mhm.
this thing going on, stuff like
Mhm.
that. And they're gonna keep putting out supplement, and they're gonna keep advancing the meta plot, you know, like
Mhm.
every year, or we 1 year later, and now, like, oh, the prince changed in that city, I better tell my player, like, oh, this happened
Mhm.
off screen, like you say, you
Mhm.
know. It's like, so how do you feel about those?
I well, Mar here says again in a sentence, yeah, a shared world with multiple parallel game sessions. I think that's that's a
Yeah,
pretty good way to wrap
multiple
it up.
parallel game table
Yeah, yeah.
in yeah.
Mm.
That's
I don't feel great if you are telling, oh, this thing happened out of character. I think that's kind of lame. Because then at that point you might as well just be giving your you might as well just be going, okay, before we meet next week, I need you to read chapters 3 and 4 of the Dristord. It's more cool to me if your players haven't even read any of the material, and you know they might not even know what's going on, and just walk past something where it's, or you know, hear in the news in game somebody's like, hey, somebody just died, you know, that because something happened in the universe that the players
yeah.
weren't interacting with.
Yeah. Dice Tale say meta should be homebrewed, no tropes. If it's homebrewed, is it just like your campaign setting? Does that even qualify as a meta plot at that point? I don't think it does.
Well, I think if you're starting with the meta plot, but you are, I think to do the meta plot well, you have to go, okay, here's what the game's designers and writers have set in motion, but at any point in time, the player characters can interject and shove that off rails whenever
Yeah.
they want. Yeah, yeah, and as he says there, uh, players needn't ever interact with meta plot. It can just add color as an incidental. Yeah, like I said, some dude gets killed. You hear about some king of countries over dying, and it's like, oh, that's weird. Well, all right, then
Mhm.
move on with our day. It just livens up the world a little bit. Or if it interests the players, then of course they can go off or their
Yeah.
characters, either or. Then they can go off and investigate it.
Because I
Mm,
mentioned a lot that I'm a fan of like I say when you start a campaign, I always say like start like with vague, like start like in the
mm,
middle, something that with some kind of conflict happening in the world that is bigger than the player, but not so big, like not like the player they're gonna reach that like about mid game, you know what I mean? Like they're gonna
mm,
reach that eventually, like and they're gonna be able to interact with that conflict. But there's something happening, but keep it vague. You don't want to
mm,
come to the table as a GM knowing everything that's gonna happen. You don't want to, you need to discover it through play as well, with
mm.
the action of the player,
Yeah.
with what makes sense. Don't come up like don't write like, oh, okay, in the year 5 of the campaign this is
Mm,
gonna happen, the year
mm,
10 of the campaign this is what the state of the world is gonna be. You
mm.
want to keep it fluid, you want to be able to keep it in motion, you want to be
Yeah.
able to adapt.
Mm. Yeah.
So I would say that that is not meta plot.
Mm,
But like I talk a lot about Pendragon on this channel and on
mm,
other people's channel when I'm invited. But because I quite like this game, but Pendragon oftentimes is played with the Great Pendragon campaign that started in year 485, and it tells you year by year what's gonna happen. So in year 45, this is gonna be the big event. In year 486, this is gonna be the big event, and your player can take part in that. And maybe at some point, because the campaign can start like deviating, and sometimes there's some point like, well, if the battle in this year finished that way, then you can
mm.
have like some choice like that.
Yeah.
But then yeah, it's kind of put you back on the railroad in a way, or a multiple choice, maybe like Arnman ask, is a metaplot just a railroad at 10,000 feet of view? To me, oftentimes it does feel like that.
I I think it depends though. The things I like about a meta plot when they're done well is that they basically have done the work of having stuff moving in the background
Mhm.
without you, the GM, having to every session go, oh crap, so the players did this, which means that this character is going to be, over here, 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 and here. And then having to think, okay, well, how does their decision here affect this character that they haven't even met, that they don't know is doing all of these things? It makes it easier where the meta plot has already set everything in motion. And so for me anyways, for me personally, your mileage may vary, but if there are NPCs on railroads, is that really the same as the player characters being on a railroad? I don't think so, because the players could at any point go over to those NPCs and
Mhm.
knock over their rail cart, and suddenly that's not on a railroad anymore.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a railroad to say this NPC that these player characters have no interaction with goes over and kills this king the player characters also have no interaction with.
Yeah.
It's just a thing that can happen.
Yeah. Like what I don't like, it's when those things are predetermined, like
Mm-hmm.
decided in
Yeah.
advance. If like as a
Yes.
GM between session, you can always decide like what
Yeah.
happened during the like
Mm.
that the player while the player were in the wilderness or in the dungeon or whatever, like the world still
Mm.
keep going. And
Yeah.
I think that's very good.
Mm-hmm.
In that sense, you want the world to still keep going. God in the Rune say meta plot is the character grab a newspaper and find out what has been happening to the world they don't care about.
Yeah, and that
I
can be
think I
the
think
most shallow level of it.
yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah, I think you need those kind of events, and then like
yeah,
maybe at some point they might interact about, oh, you remember we saw
yeah,
that in the news. Well,
yeah. And
now
I
we're like,
love using like modules as sort of a meta plot, right? The player characters aren't the adventurers going, solving all of these world problems,
mhm,
because you'll have a module for D&D or, Pathfinder or Call of Cthulhu or whatever, where some world-ending horror is happening. And it's like, well, no, there's other people going out to solve those problems. And if the players, don't choose to go solve that, that problem might develop way past what the module had written. So you have to be organic with it, right? You have to be willing to go outside the bounds of what exactly has been written and go, okay, this is what the writers planned on happening, but because it's a two-way medium, GM to players, things are going to change necessarily.
Mm. We seem to have like a different definition of metaplot here, like with Dice Tale. Like Dice Tale, having a metaplot doesn't mean a predetermined story; it means an overarching conflict.
I would say so as well. I would say it can be both.
Well, for me, like because it's a meta plot. Because if it's just an overarching conflict, is that just part of the plot? You know, when you add the meta in front of it, it means like it come like there's something outside of the game there. You know, if it's the plot, it's the plot. You know, that you want to have like background. You want to have stuff happening in the background. And you want your world to be alive, like I said, like the world doesn't just exist for the sake of character. The world exists for its own sake. People do their own stuff. They have their own goal, their own. So the world keeps stay in motion when the character are not around. But it's like it's fluid. It's not predetermined, and you discover it. Like the worlds keep moving, but you discover what happened in the world when the character are around. Oftentimes, because like they're your almost your point of view of the campaign. So you have to give the feeling that the worlds keep moving, but you're only gonna know once the character interact with it.
Because
the meta
definitely can be a predetermined story when it's done poorly. A la the later incarnations of Dark Sun, where they go, "Oh yeah, the Sorcerer Kings get killed," and it's like, huh? And it's like, yeah, and it's these specific characters that kill the Sorcerer Kings, and it's like, well, those weren't. But in my home game, my player characters killed the Sorcerer Kings, so they're retconning my home game with their predetermined plot that came out after we already finished everything. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah,
and that was the problem. That was the problem as well with like I said, World of Darkness. Like they would every new supplement they would advance the meta plot and stuff like that at some point, and just like but there's a solution to that. That when you start the campaign, you choose the book you're going to be using the campaign, and you don't add any new books mid campaign. So if a new book can come out with advancing the meta plot, well, that new book is not in your campaign because it wasn't out at the start of your campaign. So you can just you can just ignore it.
Yeah, that's how I've dealt with Pathfinder 2nd Edition being released in the middle of my Pathfinder 1st Edition campaign. Is just like, and I think I actually, this is one of the things I spoke with Jacob Bowman and James Jacobs about on, because I've spoken with some of the developers at Paizo on the topic of metaplots, because they eventually decide that like the big major, at least one of, probably the most one, there's a giant hole to the abyss that's spilling out demons, pretty big problem. One of the first things they do in the Pathfinder 2nd Edition metaplot is that gets solved. But they say they intentionally have left it vague. They say eventually someone is going to solve the problem, because it's such a huge problem. There's enough people pouring, their lives and resources into it that somebody solves it. We're not going to say who, though. We're not, it's whatever it is at your table. That's the adventuring party that solves it. If they die, they die. They don't solve it. So it's you can run into one issue where it's like, you can diverge from the timeline where it's like, oh crap, the world was supposed to be closed by now, but our characters haven't done that yet. Does that mean another adventure? Is that a set timer? Are you now racing head to head with another adventuring party to try and solve well, not necessarily adventuring party in that context, but and you could run it like that,
and that would become like because like Dice Tale again say, like, as an example of the start of a campaign, you could have two crown prince competing for favor. Players could join one faction or completely stay out of it. But that I would say, like, because how you would make the difference between like a meta plot and just something that is the plot of your campaign or just background plot. There's like meta plot for me anyway is something different. It's almost like come with the game kind of force, and it's those games that do the give you out of lore and like background setting on what's happening in this world. That's what I consider as meta plot. What you do at your table, it's just background plot. It's just plot. It's part of the campaign you're running now. It's part of your world. It doesn't come from outside. So I don't know. Maybe we use the word differently, but
Well,
the,
I
the
mean,
meta word for me
mm,
that's what it implies. It's
yeah, but I
outside.
mean, to me, meta just implies you have this scenario, but this scenario has come from a book. You didn't make it up as a GM. Um,
Hmm.
that's all that implies to me, is that it's not from your own content.
That's a good question here that I'll ask. When do you introduce the meta plot? At the first session or maybe fifth? Also, what happens if meta plot gets solved early?
Hmm.
The usually, from what I've seen, metaplot is introduced in session -1. It's like when you tell your player like,
Hmm.
oh, I want to run this game, and then you do them like a huge fucking lore dump that they don't care about, and then they're gonna
Yeah.
ask you like a 10,000 question about it later on.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's usually what happened with metaplot.
Yeah, usually the way I solve that problem is I go in my session 0 or -1, whatever you want to call it. I go, all right, how much how much do your characters know about the world slash how much do you want to know? I just go, if you're okay with playing somebody that's not that caught up on current events, I won't give you a lore dump. Otherwise, here's some reading material, because I have some players that enjoy reading about the meta plot and learning that sort of stuff. And sometimes they'll be playing a character that knows a lot about the world, so it makes sense for them to know all of that stuff. Um, Otherwise, I'm fine with them not knowing about it, and then maybe on the first session they start finding out that there's a big war because suddenly a bunch of soldiers have come to their door knocking to recruit them. And they're like, what the hell's going on? Or maybe they don't see that happening until the fifth session. Maybe it's not as urgent as that.
Yeah, and like one game I think that tried to do the one not games it's a thing. It's Arn World.
Mm-hmm.
They, from what I understand, they committed to say like, well, now you can start your campaign at this year, and we're never gonna put like material that goes beyond that. So now like we can put like stuff in the past, explain more stuff from the
Yeah.
past. We can go on the side. We're not gonna go in the future from that. I think that could be a good compromise.
Oh, hold
But
on.
then
I'm
again,
getting a call here. Sorry.
okay, that again, that it's a very like a predetermined world. Which do you expect your player to learn about the world? Do you want to like? Much rather like create it like as we play. Yeah. Armament high level NPC and bad bosses have a motivation for what they do. Usually they react to player activity, and it might mean the PC influence the king, which in turn influence the evil boss. Yeah, and obviously early on in the campaign, maybe the player are too small fish to fry to even the boss notice them, or the evil guy notice them, or the king notice them. But it's something that they might know is going on in the world, and they might not know the detail. They might not know, but something that they might get there later on. Something to look forward to, in my opinion. That's why I say like keep it vague, and the players like as the character learn more about the plot, then you can figure out as you go and make it interesting, base and link the thing that happened. Yeah. You're a stranger rowing into Jacala Harbor for the first time, knowing nothing about the local country and probably not speaking the language. No lordom needed. Yeah, I think that's or even like in Vampire too. Like you just got embraced. You're a new. You don't know the prince. You don't know the vampire society because you're new. You just like been turned. I'm talking about that because that's the example I've been using. Not that
Mm.
I'm a big fan of Vampire. I know like Black Lodge games are, but nobody's perfect.
uh,
Yeah. And another form of meta plot that oftentimes like people maybe don't think about, but I think actually qualify is IP games. And some IP are more susceptible to that than other. But like if I say we're gonna play in the game of you're gonna play in the world of Star Wars. Are you gonna play in the same time as the movies that happen, like the three
yeah,
movies?
because then you have the issue of, if you play, are you doing an alt timeline, or are you playing in the middle of it, or
Or you're
if
playing
you
after, you're playing before.
mhm, if you use it as just I like using IPs as just a timeline thing that
Hmm.
happens, right? Because if you play before or if you play during conflicts, then you're setting up that your character's actions don't really matter that much unless you're just doing a full retcon of the actual IP's timeline. And
Yep.
then whenever they release new material, well, how are you going to make that copacetic with your at-home world? And you're just having to do too much like rewriting, at that
Mm.
point, why are you even using the IP if you're retconning everything? So, yeah.
What you mentioned, oh, your character action don't matter that much. Like that's always like with the meta plot. It's always like the big problem I have is like all your character are always in the shadow of those bigger events. And when you do the
Yeah.
IP, like you got always, yeah, yeah, your character might be cool, but he's not Luke Skywalker. You know what I mean? It's not like Han Solo. It's not like
You're tiptoeing the line between living in
mm,
the shadow of those characters and having a character to strive towards to be
yeah.
to your characters to look up to.
And even like if you overtake the character and now like your character become cooler than Han
Yeah,
Solo and he's the one that like that finally like blow up the
yeah.
second Death Star or
And
whatever. And
and
it's like
specifically in Star Wars, I mean, God, you could talk about characters becoming Mary Sue's and my super cool Jedi Order and my oh my God, 40K has the same issues with. Well, my super cool Imperium Order actually does all of this with all of the. So I think the meta plot can be there as a good tone guideline too, when it's done well. It can be
mhm.
a sort of setting boundaries as to this is what we're looking for, man. Don't go too crazy with this. There are set points where this is a character that's incredibly powerful. This is a character that's pretty weak. This is a character that's somewhere in the middle, so we don't need to but it can cause that issue of the one-upmanship of like I'm gonna
Yeah.
you know
Like El said, that's how I feel as well. Your character doesn't matter because they aren't really changing anything. Luke is, or Captain Kirk is, or Frodo is.
hmm,
Like I love Dune,
hmm.
but I wouldn't want to play like in a Dune game
No, I don't think
because
so. Yeah.
the story told in Dune is so big that then like with Poet 3Ds, nothing will match that. It's always
On
gonna be like a
yeah,
sideline story, like like a
on on the flip side, I think these IP games can work well when the protagonists of them are not particularly heroic. I think
yes,
Fallout works very well with its meta plot
yes,
because, yeah, you can play a pretty strong dude. You can play effectively somebody that becomes, a president, a great political leader. But at the end of every Fallout game, it it's usually pretty grim. It's like you make things better for a little while. Things get, with the exception of Fallout 4, whatever the hell that ending was, but let's pretend that didn't exist. And Fallout's 1 through New Vegas, they all of the endings they feel like Pyrrhic victories or minor if they're victories at all.
hmm,
And so it feels like uh you're not really showing someone up in that way. And you would have to have that discussion with your session zero in a game like that of, okay, if we are setting it after the events of Fallout 3, which ending? What exactly are we saying is canon? The canon endings of things if you're going like a video game IP. I'm not sure what is the case in the Fallout tabletop RPG because I was not interested in its mechanics at all.
hmm. And they are like also like one thing that I'm stealing from Bear, the Gen X GM, that he likes to run a lot of Star Trek, and he said at some point, like one thing that I found was very clever. You say if we run in the Star Trek, but what happened in the TV show or TV show in the world, you know what I mean? Like with like Kirk and stuff like that, like their character. It's like
That's cool.
yeah, it's like you in the world there's a TV show like in our world like we have like NCIS and we have like
Mm,
those police procedural show that we understand are not reality. They try
but
to depict
they're
something.
reality based. Yeah.
Yeah. So you say for that for me when I run Star Trek, that's what I do. Like those show exist, so you can kind of refer to them, but you have to understand it's kind of TV. So the world's going to be like the reality of the world is going to be somewhat different. I think that's maybe a good compromise there. To you say, well, Kirk, you don't live in the shadow of Kirk because Kirk is a character on TV, right? You might do something similar to Kirk, but what you're doing is the real deal. And
then your dumb references to the TV. This is just like that time that they can be in character dumb references, which is fine. I'm fine with that if it's if it's something your character would do.
Yeah, and then also like because there's a big thing that people often talk about rule lawyer, but now we have a new term, the lore lawyer.
Oh God, yeah.
The setting law, yeah, exactly like that. It's gonna say, well, actually, in this world, people that like the fucking nerds.
make them play a historian that is just very sure that all of the books they've ever read are correct, and then really confuse them when they're faced with active evidence of
Yeah.
Of the contrary.
Yeah, but it's or like you say, if you make your own setting and stuff like that, and you can say like, I'm always a big fan of like, well, it's gonna be like X, but Y. Like I said, that works well because then you say like, okay, it's not X, so it's like X.
Yeah, you do make a good point though. You need to, if you're running an IP setting, the GM needs to be the one that's the most knowledgeable about that setting. And you need, if there's confusion, like if you were running Star Wars, you would need to make it clear we're running the expanded universe, pre-Disney's retconning. We're running, for some horrific reason, Disney's version of the of the we're running what exactly you are hoping to evoke there, what is canon, what isn't canon, and you would need to do not even exactly some lore dumping, but some qualifying. You need to qualify what does it mean to be running Star Wars, because in current year that can mean many things.
Yeah, and then again, like there's there's a required reading. Like how much you expect. Like so again, if you do something like you're new to the world or you're new to this world, you can then waive a bit more.
Yeah, and like something with Fallout 4 that I think it did well for a tabletop RPG, but not for its game, because it just sort of dropped it after like the first 30 minutes, is playing a character that doesn't realize they're in apocalypse until they don't know what all's happened, and so they don't need all of the lore, but they're just like pretty fine and okay with that 30 minutes in. But yeah, but I think that's a cool idea. If you did have somebody that wanted to play in an IP game just because they wanted to play in the game and they thought it sounded interesting, but they didn't, you don't want to stack them with, all right, first play through Fallout 2, you're going to need to know that, and then you're going to need to play through Fallout New, or you can watch like these hours of lore videos on YouTube. You have something to just play a character that's been cryogenically frozen, or just lives on some backwater planet that doesn't know about what all is going on, and then suddenly gets picked up. And
so it seemed to be like, I'm not a big fan of like a meta plot. You seem to be much more tolerant to it than I am.
Yeah, it takes some of the work off of the GM's shoulders when it's done.
Oh yeah, you mentioned that. You mentioned that.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Like sometimes something I disagree with, because if I have a bunch of reading to do, I'm not a good reader. You can see when I put the message on screen.
And I'm and I have I'm a technical writer by trade, so I'm blasting through stuff, just like, give it to me, whatever. And then I'm also an editor, so I go through stuff and I'm like, that sounds like crap, and I cut it out and I just move on to the next thing. And
so, I was kidding. Like I'm just like, it's just like reading out loud that I guess stumble upon.
Oh no, I don't like like reading stuff to my players. Like I'm not gonna I'm not a box text guy.
Me neither. Like I found like, and also like oftentimes like those are like way too wordy. That's something
Yeah.
I want to talk at some point. Like you describe a scene, you
Mm.
set the tone, you describe a scene.
Mm.
You're not trying to fucking wax poetic,
Oh,
Don't
yeah.
try to impress like, oh, use like
Yeah,
this
we
flurry
the
language,
yeah, the
Keep it
chat was talking
short.
about it, Dickens earlier, and yeah,
Oh
if you're
yeah, yeah,
sounding like Dickens, there's a problem because Dickens explicitly wrote to fill pages.
yeah.
That's for some reason not really taught. And well, okay, you could come up with a reason, but Dickens was basically the first clickbait guy. He would have like one sentence moving the plot forward, and then the rest would just be pages and pages of
Yeah.
tune in next month, buy the next one. Yeah. And yeah. um
And there's something. Give me a second, please.
oh, go ahead. um let's see. Guardian of the Rune says it depends on the scope of the IP. If the IP is very character focused, it's not good for RP. If the world universe is the engaging part of the IP, there are many things you can do with it. And then L responds, most IP is character focused. Name one that isn't. I would say Dune. I would say
Dune is
I,
very character focused. Dune
I
is
would say
very, very focused on Paul, the first book. The rest is
yes,
trash,
yes.
so the rest doesn't count. But
Okay. I meant the IP as a whole, though, not just one book.
no, the IP is just one
It's-
book. The rest is
okay,
fucking
okay,
trash.
that's fair. But that's what I was going to say. With the exception of Paul Atreides, it's
Yeah,
Dune is very much about the world.
yeah. Because like oh,
Oh,
sorry, I'm
no, you're
getting like
fine. Yeah.
yeah, fucking Dune fan, like or tweaking my signal. The guild is censoring me. No, Frank Herbert wrote like, an amazing book, and then like when people pick up on it, and then you
Yeah.
realize what he wrote an amazing book by
Mm.
accident, and then he fucking spent like fucking 5 other books to try to retcon it and then destroy what he did.
Oh, Wheel of Time. There are
Yeah,
kind of too many characters for it to be focused on one in particular. Wheel of Time is very much about how the world works,
yeah.
and
But I think that a lot of the a lot of bad fiction is not character focused, because that's a hallmark of bad fiction. Like there's a writer, an author that is a world builder, a world weaver, and then he spends so much time creating this world, and he thinks he's Tolkien and stuff like that, and then he want to present this world to the character, to the audience. So he puts some character in it, but the character are fucking like don't have emotion or just fucking like bland as hell, and the world become the star of the show. There's a lot of book, there's a lot of movie that are like that, but it's hard to name them because they're fucking shit and we don't
you
remember
could
them.
you could make a very compelling argument that Star Wars is more world focused because George Lucas is a much better world builder than he is a dialogue and character writer. Um,
But he had a very strong character in the first movie. When you
yes,
start to the when you start in the prequel, they were much weaker, and then it
yeah,
was more about the world. But then they
yeah.
also fucking always go back to Tatooine for some reason, which is like the fucking most boring world ever. But it's a desert, and there's a desert near in California, which is convenient to film. So I guess that's reason enough.
Hmm.
But and it's also about the scope of the story that's being told. I think like in the world of Conan, because we talked a lot about Conan tonight, I guess, like with the Conan 2020.
Mhm.
But in the take care, Dice Tales. Thank you
Mhm.
for dropping by. I think in the world of Conan, it's a great place to set role playing game, because the Conan is a dude. It's a dude that
Mm.
can exist in the world, but he's
Yeah.
not like world changing. He's doing his
Mm.
own stuff. He got some influence. He's a big
Mm.
character, but m- probably like the vast majority of the people in the world don't know who Conan is. You know, so he's just like a dude living in the world. You
Mm.
could have like thousand of character of the same stature. So it leaves you a lot of room for that. It's when you go into the
Mm.
epic when you go into the
Yeah.
epic that then like you're always gonna over like the epic story of those characters. Even in the Lord of the Ring, you have like a lot of place to room with the ages and stuff like that. But there's always
Mhm.
like a big epic event. What do you do?
Mm.
You're
Yeah.
not carrying the ring to Mount Doom. What do? You play a bunch of hobbits in the Shire that try to catch a criminal.
Or you do what
Then
the video
why do you
games
even
you do what the video games did and retcon that actually there were more than just the one ring. They made others and hid them, and then it's like
yeah
and then you have
and
the if the
You-
players do interact with those big, the
Yeah.
main characters, now you have to play them in a way that's coherent with that. And so now there's more pressure on you as a GM to think of like, how would Aragorn react in this situation that's never really been written about, so.
Mm. And that's also unsatisfying because it's just like, well, now you're just like doing copycat anyway. You're
Yeah,
just like
exactly. Yeah.
creating like you're just like you're not doing something epic. But you're doing something that is like you bring the epic to a more mundane level, and then you're doing something
I'm not a big fan of like the route that some people go with it, where it's like, okay, the for the plot to happen, they need to make sure that the Fellowship does get to Mount Doom, and there's like a catch. There's some reason that it's more difficult, and they need the player characters' help here, and it's like, okay, we're doing like some time wizardry here. That's that feels kind of
Arman ask, is H.P. Lovecraft building great character or great situation? I think he's good at building atmosphere.
Yeah.
But because he write a lot of short story,
Mm.
his character are not very like deeply characterized. And
Yep.
so you make them like very mundane, that you can like you project a lot of yourself on the character that you read about. Like you cut a few, it's like you fill in the blank a lot because like they're short story.
Yeah. And there's another example of, a monthly publication, magazines are much older than Amazon is, El. I'm not sure what you're getting at with that prior comment. Yeah.
Yeah. Literary magazine. That's what it used to be.
Yep.
Yeah. Conan is short story as well. Exactly. That's true.
Yep, that's true.
Yeah. But the difference is that Conan is short story, but multiple short story with the same character, so you have time to develop the character more.
Yep.
While in H.P. Lovecraft, their character where the characters were very disposable. You would have this guy for this story, like a few things about him, and then like at the end of the story, he's gonna be done. You know what I mean? So that's a big difference there.
Hellraiser is more about the world than the characters, since we talked about horror not that long ago.
Yeah, it's been too long since I've seen those.
Like it's not really important who Pinhead was or is. It's just this other. In fact, the less you know, the more interesting the character is. It's just that the world is like.
But also like Pinhead, Pinhead is like the villain, the bad guy. Just like the main character. Like who the fuck cares who he is?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's oftentimes the case in horror, because I think that's done on purpose, in the sense that the more you keep the main character, and maybe that's the link with the H.P. Lovecraft as well. The more you keep the main character vague, the more you project yourself onto him.
Yeah,
and then you feel the horror more.
So maybe it's that you can have it's easier to do IPs in tabletop RPGs where there's very clear villain focus.
Like if you were to do Hellraiser, the RPG.
Because everyone knows, it's already sort of set up that the level of horror and the characters that are important are the villainous ones, and knowing that you're playing
Armin said there, like H.P. Lovecraft, bad guy.
Exactly.
Same thing. In that's like Freddy's the same thing as well. Or you have like some character that come back from movie to movie, but like it's the bad guy.
That way you're not
Jason, Mike Myers.
You're not living in the shadow of the protagonists of those films, because they usually suck. They're usually not this is an issue I had with reading through the Terminator RPG that came out recently, and it's an issue that the Terminator IP has, is that everything's living in the shadow of Arnold Schwarzenegger, because they just keep CGIing him over and over again, and bringing him back for stuff, and it's like, how long can you do that? Your new movies, all of the new Terminators are living in the shadow of his reprisal of that role in Terminator 2. Would that be happening in the tabletop? Would you have some guy trying to do a terrible Austrian accent if he was playing one of the reprogrammed Terminators? But it kind of works because the time travel is in universe so much as it is. So you can have characters die, you can have characters killed off, and then go back to a previous time. So that's
Well, it's also like a pretty stupid universe because they say
it
like,
is a
oh,
pretty yeah.
they're models, like they're robot, they're models, they're like they're manufactured, but like yeah, you wouldn't make the same guy looking the same way every time, and
Yeah.
especially not in a way that like so like remarkable. You know
So
what I mean?
stand
Like he's so
out, yeah.
noticeable.
Which they tried to fix with like the earlier models being even more awful and really easily recognizable. So it's, but yeah, for a
Yeah.
hyper competent learning computer, it really didn't get that down super
Yeah,
fast, did it?
especially like in a time like, oh, you're in post-apocalyptic stuff, like people living in a hole and hiding, and you
Yeah.
get like this huge fucking bodybuilder. Like, yeah, nobody, like there would be no fucking bodybuilder in that time. Anyway,
Yeah, but my point was in the world, they set up that you are allowed to retcon things, so it's fine to retcon things in the tabletop RPG if you were running it. So
yeah,
that's
I wouldn't like it.
I don't know whether or not that's a good thing, but it was something I thought about
Yeah, but now I think we're drifting away over our topic
a
of
little bit. We're getting
Metaplot.
into the weeds, yeah.
We're getting into the weeds. So, but is there anything you wanted to add on Metaplot on itself, or we should go to do the summary and maybe like finish on time for once?
Yeah, I'll just start with the summary. The meta plot can risk being a railroad if you're trying to hit certain events in the meta plot. It can also risk having heroes that get overshadow the main player characters. There are a lot of pitfalls to avoid with it. There's poor writers and retcons and lore dumping before the game starts and all of this, that, and the other. On the other hand, it can alleviate some of the GM having to keep track of all the moving pieces in the background if you are fine with reading what's going on. If there's a nice timeline, it can set up a very rich and detailed world for you that you don't have to spend a lot of time developing. It can, what are the words for it? You can have those heroes rather than overshadowing. They can be something to look forward to, look up to. They can
Inspire.
drive the heroics. Yes, inspire. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I think that's sort of the two flip sides.
Yeah, I would say that for me, metaplots are usually not worth it.
Mm.
I think like just like learning the material and like nerding out about the lore. Usually, it's not something that I particularly like doing. Especially like oftentimes, like I find it like poorly written. Like a lot of it is badly, is
You have to be
good writer write novels. You know what I mean? They don't write
yeah.
metaplot for RPG. So.
I would say you have to be willing to take a machete to your meta plot and be
Yeah.
very willing to get rid of the stuff that is crap or doesn't make sense, or yeah, it has to be designed to be moldable.
And I find also that it robbed me, even as a GM, it robbed me of the pleasure of discovering what the world is about with the player. I like to keep things vague because I want. Like, for me, that's fun as well. Like we discover through play. And if I try to do too much planning in advance, then I'm gonna. It's tempting to be rigid afterward, and if the player come in knowing that there's a meta plot, there's a big world predefined, they're gonna be more tempted to ask question about the world. And oftentimes it's gonna lead to out of character question about the world because like they assume that my character would know that, so then they ask the player if you.
On the flip side,
I always say let your player make assumption about the world and keep those assumptions as true.
I actually find the opposite is kind of true though, where if you're starting with a world that they're not familiar with, you get questions of like, does this world have an X? Does this world have a Y? I don't know if this exists. So I think that's sort of dependent on players.
I think it's also dependent on if you try to make your world like too different than the real world and stuff like that. Like that's why I'm always a big fan of like keep your world mundane. Like so like the point is like the player can make assumption and you can hold those assumptions as true. So don't ask me like, oh, is there like an organized church? You want to go like, yeah, there probably is.
Yeah.
Like, so you want to go to the church? There's probably gonna be a church in the village. You don't need to ask me if there's a church there. And yeah, metaplots, you can keep your character in the shadow of the bigger story, the cooler story. You take out the lore lawyer.
Mm.
What are the good point of metaplot? I see very little.
Well, you need to do less improvising on the fly.
Yeah,
I would say when it's all, you know, it's sort of like somebody's already done your notes and your prep work for you. Your prep work is just
yeah.
reading it. You don't actually have to write anything and then come up with stuff on the fly. And for me, it's easier to. I may be unique here as an editor, but I'm sure people have different brains for this. It's easier for me to take material and cut away what I don't like than it is to generate material of
Mhm.
my own.
And there's this reminder that I always say: keep the character the star of the show.
Yes,
Don't try
exactly.
to make the world, and
Mm.
don't try to make this bigger narrative the star of
Mm.
the show.
Yeah.
What you do at the table, you're telling the story of
Mm.
the PC, which are the
Yeah.
protagonists of that
Mm.
show. They're not like side character of what you're doing there, right?
Mm. Yeah.
And oftentimes that's also a danger with the meta plot thing. You want, and that's also even when I play Pendragon, I ignore the fucking great Pendragon campaign. I like the system. I would use a
Mm.
system that we like in this kind of like mythical medieval Europe, right? You play a knight, and it works great for that because like
Mm.
otherwise, yes, you're always in the shadow of the Knight of
Mm.
the Round Table and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And in Pendragon can kind of work because the goal is to accrue glory, to be like it's baked into the game, but I think you can do without it.
Mm.
And that's why also like I say Pendragon. I prefer Paladin because of that, because like it's a bit more mundane because Charlemagne, we know more about him,
Mm.
and it's a little more like toned down. There's not like those big epic, but
Metaplots can also kind of help with backstories. They can also hinder with backstories, but they can make they can hook the player characters into the world much faster with, oh, I know this guy. I'm gonna know this NPC that exists, or I see this problem that's happening in the world. I've joined this band of adventurers to go solve this problem. So it's just a little snappier for me than
mhm.
um
it can give you like a framework from the world, like,
yeah, I
and like I
like
say,
using a meta plot as a framework rather than a
yeah.
railroad, right? I think on the worst end of it, it's a railroad, and on the best end of it, it's a framework. Yeah.
Yeah. If it gives you like some structure, like
Mhm. Yeah.
this is the wall, the city, the faction, the player in play.
Mm.
But I think they need to leave a lot of blank to fucking fill up. I think the big
Yes.
mistake, the
Yes.
people that write metaplot, like when we say metaplot again, we're talking about when it come from outside, it come from the game. There's this story written, stuff like that. Like even like the 3D games does that a lot. Like Coriolis, we mentioned earlier, Forbidden Land, they have this kind of like metaplot. They don't project too much in the future, from what I know.
Mm.
But I think that's a big mistake when you start like projecting in the future, or when you try to detail too much. I think that's where it becomes. You want to let the every table to fucking figure it out.
It needs to be open ended. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and you
Oh,
need to have a lot of like a fill in the blank space.
Hale, backstories are on our list. I don't,
Yeah,
so keep that comment.
yeah,
Save that.
yeah. I don't know if we're gonna have like a whole episode of doing on
Mm.
backstory. I talk about it a bit,
Mm.
but before, but we will we talk about it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like Alexander said, the player should face the hidden threat that ignore the empire. Yeah, that was a very good advice. I don't know if you saw that. He said, like Alexander Macris, that's what we were talking about. Is he say like when you do your campaign, you want to have like an obvious threat that distract the noble and the ruler, and a hidden threat that
Yes.
which gonna be like at some point the player are gonna try to interact with, gonna try
Yeah.
to convince the noble to pay attention to, and the noble is gonna say, "What the fuck you?" And we're too distracted with that other thing, and then it give a reason also to replace the noble.
Yep.
But yeah, that's very good. But that's something you do at your table. That's plot. That's conflict baked in the wall. I wouldn't call that necessarily meta plot unless you take it from like, oh, this is the book, and
No,
then the
yeah, the
book is
meta
gonna
plot
tell
is
you what.
what the nobles are
Yeah.
doing in their day to day and stuff. Yeah, the more
Well,
tangible threats. Yeah,
like I said, for me, the meta plot is very like when it comes from outside, when it comes
yeah,
like
yeah.
from
That's what I'm saying.
yeah,
If that's coming from the book, yeah.
yeah. I'm considering a Might and Magic PC game approach where the group moves from adventure to adventure, player choice, each related to the end space of saving the world. Might and Magic approach where the group moves from adventure to adventure. Yeah, if you can do that. That's sometimes what we call like a theme park.
Hmm.
So depending on you do your adventure, and you have like, if you pre-plan a lot of the adventures and stuff like that, it's just like there's a bunch of ride. You can choose which one you're gonna go when you're on one. When you
Yeah.
pick one, you're on that
Yeah.
ride.
Genre calls it sandboxing inside the railroad. So you're on a railroad
inside the sandbox.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Next week?
Yeah, next week. So next week we talked about like there's a topic that we wanted to talk about. Are we doing that? Keeping your player active?
Yeah, let's do that while it's fresh on the mind.
Yeah, that's something So what we mean by that is like we all had at our table like people that are passive. They're just waiting there, like listening to you, telling them a story, and then waiting for them to tell you to roll dice.
Yeah.
So we want to discuss about how to have your player like a bit like propose thing, be a little more like forthcoming and stuff like that. I think there's gonna be like a very good talk, very interesting and an important one. We might have somebody else join us. We'll see. Might not, depending on the disponibility and stuff like that. It's gonna be a surprise, I guess. Until I put the stream up and I announce it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to thank everybody for watching. I thank Tyler for joining me, and everybody that joined us live, and everybody that watched later on the replay. I hope to see you all next week. Have a good day and take care. I don't have anything to announce coming soon on my stream. I'm going to be quite busy this weekend, so I don't know what's going to happen.
I finally got gas turned back on, so hopefully I'm actually able to make videos and stuff. My home life has been a headache recently, but yeah.
Yeah, well, hopefully you're going to have like some new content coming up.
Yeah.
When is ask when is next Tyler or Max Alone video? Like I'm in the middle of a move too, so my life is quite chaotic. I'm quite busy. That's why like the content have been a bit scarce on the channel. But I probably after the move, I'm gonna go back to do a little more content. Just now, like I'm been very busy during the day. I got a bunch of stuff to wrap up. Yeah. What about you, Tyler?
Hopefully tomorrow. I'll start. I'll make a video tomorrow, I think.
You should subscribe to his channel. The link is in the description below. Yeah.
Because I've got like a giant list of videos I need to make, but I'm just like every time I sit down to start one, I'm like, I have no idea which of these videos I want to. So I just need to like order them and knock them out in a row. So
yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Yep.
What? Oh yeah, Arman. Oh yeah.
Don't worry too much. We won't get somebody like that.
No, we won't get somebody to lecture. If we get somebody else, it's gonna be like to join the conversation.
Yeah.
It's not just gonna be like to him telling us what to think. You know what I mean? Just like, yeah, we have an idea of we want to have on. But all right, take care. All have a good day.
See you, everybody.
Bye.